let's welcome Hugh.
G'day. I'm going to do the walking around thing because I'm going to try and keep you buggers awake after having a lunch and all of that, and I'll be keeping an eye out for anyone falling asleep. Hey, I'm sort of talking about strategic mindset. Who's worked under a framework of strategic mindset in the room, just generally? Does everyone have a vague idea of what it is? No? Yeah. Well, it's something that we've been using in the professional guiding world for a few years. But to roll it back a bit, it's all about our choices on terrain and getting our desires in line with what's given in terms of our avalanche danger. So in our backcountry world of either guiding or recreational skiing, we've got a kind of what I think's a real quandary in that the optimum slope for delivery of pleasure to fulfill our desires is also the optimum avalanche slope, right? It's a messy thing, okay? Hang on. So, it's almost a unique activity that the more dangerous it gets, the better it gets. Okay, a steep, I have to flip my head around, I've just been away, south-facing slope is optimum skiing, it's also optimum avalanche conditions. And so we've got this essential dilemma going on throughout what we do. And I really do think as ski guides, and I'm sorry this is such a ski guide perspective for you who don't work in that world, but I'm going to try and broaden it out to recreational skiers. We've got this dilemma that, our guests and our desires, that danger quotient meets exactly. And you don't see it in mountaineering even. The most dangerous mountaineering is not necessarily the best. Yes, there's those elements of the sport, but, we have it in our face. Well, so there is, the consequence. Stay on the carpet? Yep. Okay. Yep. Oh, there you go. Yep. To frame this another way, I'd like to quote Trev Street, who's sadly no longer with us, but who was a real part of these conferences and a part of our avalanche world in New Zealand. He had a very succinct summary of what we do as professional ski guides. I won't say that out loud. Trev liked to say this often. And he's tongue-in-cheek playing upon the fact that we're trying to manage essentially this impossible dichotomy between our guest and our own desires and the dangers that we face. Come on. So within the ski guiding world, there's been lots of attempts to apply more systematic processes to filter our decision making, and a lot of this has come from the behavioural science field. And we've been to these gigs before where people have been talking about heuristics and all this sort of stuff, and the strategic mindset development follows on from that quite closely, and it becomes about the management of our desires as guests and as guides, our aspirations for our day out there. So I went to a thing, an IFMGA a conference in Davos in Switzerland a few years ago, about 20 odd years ago, and the guy, Walter Munter, showed up there, who was this Swiss guy, and he was one of these people who developed a system to try and put a real systematic values on all these factors that come together to make a decision about our terrain choices when we're out there. I saw you sleeping there, Jamie. That was a nod. And he developed a thing called the 3x3 system, right? Piece of shit. It really didn't work at all. But while he was delivering his talk, he told an anecdote about his old man, who was also a guide, and called Munter. And I like to think that he did invent the Munter hitch, but I don't know that for a fact. But And I like to think he's called Herman. I don't know that for a fact, but it's just sounded quite good. And Herman had 3 rules for ski guiding. And he guided for 50 years and he never saw an avalanche. And his first rule was never ski the first day after a storm. It was obvious. Most likely day to avalanche. Don't go skiing that day. The second rule was if you had a choice of 2 slopes, always ski the least steep slope. Obvious, right? Very sophisticated terrain filter starting to develop here, right? The third one, in the springtime, always be in the restaurant by lunchtime, okay? And we'll see these modes reflected in some of our modern filter. You know, we like to call this the spring diurnal now, but in fact it was a desire to be in the restaurant by lunchtime. Apply this, 50 years working in the Alps, never saw an avalanche. Didn't know what all the fuss was about, right? But I don't know that as much as this is an effective approach for the world that a lot of us work in. You know, it's probably not a good fit for our guests and their desires. And again, we go back to Trev's fundamental dilemma of what we're up to and trying to reconcile that risk with the reward that we're providing. And I work up in sorry, I should have started with that, shouldn't I? I'm Hugh, sorry, and I work here at Harris Mountains Heliski in Wanaka, and I'm also the guiding director at a company up in Alaska called Tordrillo Mountain Lodge. And I'm an IFMGA guide too. Ooh. So, you know, in our industry, we have these clients with high desire to achieve things, and as guides, we get swept up into that. And so, in order to manage some of these processes, Atkins, who was involved with CMH for many years, in 2014 presented a paper to the ISSW developing an idea of what he called strategic mindset. A definition of mindset, and I think this, you know, we can see of some of the other discussions that we've had today, Don's, Nathan's, we're talking a lot about our mindset as we go out into the mountains and the repercussions of what having a fixed or inflexible mindset could do. But a mindset is a fixed mental attitude. It's a disposition that's going to predispose your decision making from that point on. It's just generally an inclination or a habit. So this is the wordy bit, I guess, but Atkins looked back into social decision making within behavioural science. Looked at the way we make decisions, you know, the automatic processes, a lot of what discussion is about, and that includes the use of heuristics and the pitfall of heuristic traps, obviously, and the more reflective process, the 2 ways that we make decisions and the way that these combine, and they're each valid processes, they have to be part of our process. And they're a survival mechanism. Looking at this into a ski guiding context, you know, we need to have an awareness of these things going on in the background, that we do need to understand some of these basic elements of human behaviour. We need to expand the selection of desires. That, just to sort of put that in layman's terms, that means, hey, you know, we all want to go out and ski the steep and deep. I mean, whoever coined that phrase for ski guiding as a moron, eh? You know, we've been beholden to that for years now, steep and deep. But, you know, people have that aspiration for steep and deep, but on the day, the avalanche conditions aren't permitting you to do that. So you have to expand your selection of desire. You have to adjust your desire to fit circumstances and conditions. And so that might be in a ski guiding role, we're going to start amping up the beauty of skiing long, rolling, scenic runs, okay? And enjoying the environment around us, okay? We're going to use some of these techniques and try and make this adjustment. And this is where the strategic mindset for guides has been a huge assist for us. Strategic mindset also incorporates nudge feeling theory. And, you know, it's just this idea that with with a few different kind of little ideas and attitudes drip fed in, you can give someone a bit of a nudge and sway the direction of their feeling, of their emotion and their decision making. So with positive reinforcement and indirect suggestion, we can influence motives, incentives, decision making of groups and individuals. And the strategic mindset classifications that Atkins developed are an attempt to nudge us guides towards decision-making processes that adjust desire to fit conditions. So does that kind of make sense, I think? From those of you who've used it, that's what the idea is, eh? It's to give us a framework into which to start to apply it to our specific terrain choices. So there's it's kind of a shitty reproduction there, but there's the table of mindsets that was presented in 2014, and really unchanged, we still apply this in the modern world, and it's ubiquitous now. Like the two places I work mainly use it. When I've visited other operations around the world, it's great. We all slip into the same tool. We have this basis that we're all working from. Just to run quickly through those classifications, we have a mindset of assessment where we've got unknowns out there. We've got a mindset of stepping out when we're starting to gain information and gain confidence. My feeling is that, in fact, there's and Atkins refers to this in the text there, but I think there's actually two complete tiers within stepping out, which is the difference between stepping out cautiously and stepping out with confidence. And to me, we should probably have that as a whole layer there, because they're quite different attitudes. We've got the status quo, and again, I'll talk about that a little bit later when we look at the recreational model, or looking at developing a recreational model. And then we've got the stepping back, the entrenchment for managing our persistent weak layers or whatever we're dealing with, and then down to open season and being back in the bar at lunchtime mode. So we've been using this mindset tool here since 2015, and I think, generally we're finding a real effective thing. We create an environment at our morning meeting in the professional world where a lot more terrain planning is going ahead, whereas in the past we might have been making decisions on that automatic process that we referred to earlier. We're now much more in a reflective mode. We're trying to create a space that is warm, well-informed environment in the guides meeting room, where we can kind of step back and try and make some of these terrain filters before we go out into the field. And it takes some of those emotive decisions out of the picture. We're not there trying to make our first decision on terrain when we're standing at the top of the run, absolutely frothing, with a bunch of people who've paid you a lot of dollars to be there and making our first terrain decision. We're making a filter before we've left the room in the morning that we're going to set all our subsequent terrain decision makings within. So we're not getting swayed so much by the emotional or, in our professional world, those commercial drivers. And we generally operate under a consensus model for both our mindset. It's not like in the morning I get up and go, our mindset today is going to be this. People come together and we look at the parameters, and usually there's some robust debate about what our mindset might be. But we leave in the morning, the idea is we have a consensus. There's some of the finest minds of Harris Mountains hard at work in the morning making the decision. And all professional operations have some kind of a system whereby they look at their avalanche forecasting, whether they're using, like we do here, we use the MSC framework within our organisation. And we've added a few bits at the bottom here where we have our strategic mindset. And in the info to target window here, we'll have often more that will back up that about how we're going to find information or how we might behave during the day. And we sign off on it in a consensus manner. We'll obviously, I got the date wrong here, we'll obviously apply this mindset to some kind of terrain filter. At Harris Mountains here we have a run coding system which I'm not going to get into too much, but we have a pre-discussion about, and we'll close some runs for the day. The ones that are marked orange, to open up that run, we would need to have consensus between guides in the field and have gathered further first-class obs before we can recode. So again, we're applying a filter to our terrain decision-making. We have within our mapping program photos of runs that we might discuss. Some of the more common areas we skied, we've actually sort of put in some boundaries to give us an indication of where we might anticipate hazard, and therefore some sort of preordained classification of our runs as per terrain. You can see why that, if you look at those two there, why that boundary on Crag Royston exists where it does. We can see the standard route on what we call Holy Moses going down, and all of this terrain in here obviously a little bit more susceptible to avalanche because it's really good skiing. In Alaska we use a similar system. We have a run discussion that we discuss, and there's our mindset there with stepping out. We've got stepping out with caution. We're going to be hitting, this is after a big storm cycle, we're going to be hitting the green runs, and we're going to be aware of even our lower angle terrain that we might be exposing ourselves to overhead exposure or run out zones from other aspects that we're not actually intending to ski. And again, in the professional world we have these, these tools. We have a mapping program based on the ArcGIS system that I can click on, and in our run discussion we can highlight a run, we can tick a box that gives us the avalanche paths and events. Whoop. Sorry about that. We can click in further, look at a run photo, and we could click in further and see an actual photo of a avalanche event here. This was the 17th skier on the slope who triggered a little pocket and took a ride down through here and broke his femur. But we have introduced in our world at least this two-tier filter on our terrain selection, and our agreed mindset should then be reflected in our decision making. So if we're doing our run coding here and we're looking at a bunch of runs and we're opening up a bunch of new terrain compared to what we did yesterday, but our mindset is conservative, we need to either change our mindset or change our terrain. We've got one of those wrong. So to me, it's a really effective second filter to our terrain selection. And as I mentioned earlier, the challenge for us as guides is to then recalibrate not only our own desires, but those of our guests to work within that mindset parameter that we've established. So we have, for example, we've got this more structured approach. We share that with our guests. We advise guests of the regional avalanche danger. We might advise guests of what runs we've actually closed at the morning. A client might say to me, can I go over there? And I said, fuck, I would love to. But those other guys at the morning meeting closed that thing. So I'm sorry, but if it was my call, well, but those guys. So we've got some really sophisticated techniques that we apply here, and we actually will discuss that mindset. I've started to talk to my guests about my mindset, particularly ones I ski with a lot, and I'm going, hey, today we're stepping back, and they've actually educated themselves to know what those terms were, and so we're subtly altering their desires, as I referred to earlier. We're putting this whole change of their behaviour, the mindset, the framework that they go out with. The feedback, I've done some exhaustive surveys I don't have one flowchart or one graph in my talk, and I'm envious of all those other ones, but I did do some research, exhaustive research, and I got some feedback. And some of that feedback was, from the system, one thing that a lot of people like is that we have by using the day before, the system relies on what happened the day before. And it's a really easy system to then refer back to, because if you're going, yesterday we called our mindset stepping out cautiously. Today we're saying it's status quo. I wouldn't expect as a guide to be then skiing a whole bunch of new kinds of terrain. So it's really easy to relate to what we did yesterday. And as I said before, we've got the explanation of the mindset tool as our clients, as a tool in our box too. And guides have started to come to me and said, yeah, we really like this because we're sharing this with our guests and we're seeing their mindset change. So what of the backcountry recreational skier? You know, to me, it seems, and someone might have done a whole bunch of work on this and I might be well behind the case here, so let me know if I am and I'll just close it up here. But I don't really see that. Again, I did another exhaustive survey, peer-reviewed, and all of that. And I called up a mate of mine who is a really enthusiastic ski tourer and spends weeks every winter ski touring. And I asked him, how do you manage the mindset issue? And he looked at me blankly. And you know, to me, it seems funny that a tool that's become such a part of our working lives as professionals doesn't seem to have filtered into the recreational skier. And I think it is a real, and again, referring back to some of the other talks that we're hearing, it's about people changing that mindset that they go out with could help with these decisions. And it seems that, I know that within I'm not a part of the avalanche education framework currently in New Zealand. I'm still a bit miffed that I've only got a level 2 and some people now have a level 6. So until they give me a level 6, I'm not going to do any of that kind of stuff. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think we are teaching the mindset tool in the professional world, but it's not filtered down onto the sort of the backcountry course kind of level. And maybe we should be. So I think if we're going to develop a mindset tool for the recreational users, there's some things we have to think about. One of the real strengths of the professional system, as I alluded to, is that it's got a continuity of operation. We're always referring it to that day before sort of scenario. You know, status quo is a great thing to have, but if you weren't there yesterday to know the status, you've got no quo, or to go with it. It is really relevant. It's really predependent on the fact that it's assuming we're there every day applying these filters, we know what they are, and then we're going to apply them to the next day with the changing of conditions. That to me seems to be a real challenge to your infrequent recreational user. We create in our professional world, as I said, this workspace to use the reflective process of thinking, this is what it's all about really. And that again, as a recreational user, it's a bit like how Don was saying before, he used to jump in the car in Dunedin and drive overnight to go climbing in the Downs. And that modus operandi, there's not a lot of room for reflective process decision making. You're just going towards your goal. And you're probably going to be tempted to stick at that goal, irrespective of other information that you receive along the way, that the fact that the route you've chosen might be completely inappropriate to the avalanche conditions could easily slip out of that picture. And like one of the reasons I showed you those terrain tools that we have and use in the professional world is, we have a lot more access and knowledge generally in the micromanagement of our terrain. And when we apply our mindset to that terrain, we're doing it with a lot of knowledge about that terrain. And again, I think that's a real challenge for recreational users is how do they find out that degree of terrain knowledge to start to apply a mindset to it? But I still think there's some value there. There we go. So any recreational mindset structure must be related to the backcountry avalanche forecasting, the information that's available to our recreational users. It must probably have some relation to the danger scale, because that's what's now, all our colour wheels and all of that. That's what we're sort of pegging our information dissemination on. We must incorporate into backcountry education. It must be framed in a language that's accessible to recreationalists. Some of the language of the current system, I think, would be it's not as straightforward as it could be. And it must be applied around education about that importance of of creating those that space, like the professional workspace, in your pre-trip planning, even as an amateur, saying, hey, the value of having that moment of pause to get together, to go, this is what our goals are for this trip, this is the information we have, this is the terrain we want to go to. You've got to try and encourage people to create that space. I kind of took the Atkins model and I've come up, which is a temporary thing, the Barnard model, and on the left we've got our mindsets. It starts with I don't really know shit, and comes down the left hand side. I've split the two stepping out into two things. I'm not sure whether you can have a status quo in a model that you've got infrequent users, but there's something that has to say there that yes, tomorrow's pretty much going to be the same as today, particularly if you're planning a multi-day trip. Time to pump the brakes. If you're dealing with a subtle PWL or something, just be very afraid. And down to, send it and be back in the bar at lunchtime for your spring diurnal. Again, I'm chucking these out tongue-in-cheek, but I just think that as a community, if we think there's some value in taking this over from the professional world into the recreational world, that there's probably a good way of doing it. Like just looking at those, the typical danger scale that you might have. I mean, many recreational users would have to be in assessment mode because they just haven't been out in the backcountry. And again, just even starting to get people to think that at the start of every trip, you shouldn't be trying to send it straight away. You should be out there gathering your information, okay? And maybe we can cleverly and with colours and wheels and shit like that, tie this all together in a nice little package would be an awesome thing, and for someone who's good at that stuff. So I guess in summary, we've got this tool that we've been using in the professional world, and it's really helping us adjust moderating our decisions around terrain. It's assisting us to moderate our client expectation. And this moderation of desire dependent on conditions is probably as critical to our recreational users as it is to the professional guide and guests. And I think that the development of an adapted model for recreational backcountry skiers could assist in their terrain decision making and have an impact on avalanche outcomes. And I think it's always good to keep in mind that even as a professional, you go through, we apply all this shit, and then we go out there and we've done our systematic approach, we're all educated, we've got this intimate terrain knowledge, and then we go out and we still kind of get it a little wrong sometimes. And we've just got a little video from our Heliski season, with a bit of luck, last year, and guys are skiing a more moderate line than you could on this slope. The helicopter's got the GoPro on just so we can sell some videos, and if you look closely as he starts to lift and turn, you'll see the cracking start to happen, and as he spins round, a fairly decent size avalanche came down. And the guys involved in the decision-making process here, they pretty much followed our parameters, but they still managed to get caught out by quite a subtle instability in the snowpack. And again, we rewrote the whole mindset for the following day after this one. We went from a stepping out cautionally to rapidly stepping back with our tail between our legs. And even us, with all our information, our knowledge and our experience, we get caught out. So none of these tools are 100% effective. Thank you.
We've probably only got time for one quick question. It went a little bit long. Any just one quick question, anyone? Go for it.
Have you been, like, since 2015, when you've been using this strategic mindset strategy, have you been tracking increased or stable client satisfaction as well as a lower degree of, like, triggers or near misses or accidents?
No. That was a great question. Certainly the direction we should be heading towards. I would say anecdotally, I mean, that's a bit tongue-in-cheek. Anecdotally, yes, I believe we have. Yes, I think we are starting to see guests appreciate some of the subtleties about what we do by sharing these kind of tools with them. But to draw a conclusion in any empirical way, I'd have to say it's beyond what I've done so far. But I know there are studies underway to quantify these kind of things, and I think maybe even by just bringing up this issue here, someone might want to seize the moment and grab it, go with it.
Cool.
Cheers.
Awesome. Let's thank you for that.